Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Alhamdulillah, in this video, we're going to be speaking about the difference between MSA, Modern Standard Arabic, and what's called Fusha, which is classical Arabic, if you will. So in this video, we're going to speak about the development of both of them, and really we're going to answer the question of whether there actually is a difference between Modern Standard Arabic and Fusha. These are two terms that anybody who's studying Arabic will always come across: Fusha, classical Arabic; MSA, Modern Standard Arabic. So inshallah, in this video, it should clarify the difference and similarity and really what's going on between these two terms, if you will. So what is Fusha? So Fusha is what we call classical Arabic, which is pretty much the Arabic that was spoken during the time of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, so during the beginning of Islam, and also the Arabic that was spoken pretty much right before the time of Islam, and that was spoken by the Arabs before they started, mixing with other people and so on and so forth. So it's the classical Fusha Arabic is the Arabic that you're going to find in the Quran, is the Arabic that you're going to find in ahadith, statements of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and things of that nature, in ancient Arabic poetry. This is all considered Fusha. So if we want to understand Fusha, we should look at how the science of grammar and how the sciences of the Arabic language was sort of developed. And that will sort of give us a better understanding of what exactly Fusha is. So if you look at, for example, the science of grammar, the science of Nahu in the Arabic language, we'll see that the science of grammar was always an applied science that was used by the Arabs in their speech. So when we talk about the science of grammar, so anybody who's studying Arabic will see that, we talk about the rules of grammar. So marfu', mansub, majrur, mubtada, khabar, the predicate, and so on and so forth. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about the science of grammar. How did this come about? How did these terms that we call mubtada and khabar and dharf and fi'l and fi'l al-madi and fi'l al-mudari', these types of terminologies that we find, how did they actually come about? So if we look at the science of grammar, that should give us a better understanding of how Fusha and how the Arabic language was standardized and so on and so forth. So the science of grammar was an applied science, was always an applied science used by the Arabs in their speech. So that's why the poet said, said, I'm not a grammarian who needs to chew his words. Rather, I'm sadaqiyun, I speak in his eloquent. Sadaqiyun means that the Arab, the Arabic language is part of his bones, it's part of his blood. These are talking about the Bedouins that they mixed with non-Arabs during the time of Jahiliyyah, the time before Islam or the time beginning of Islam. These Arabs, like the Prophet and his companions, these Arabs weren't Arabs that had really mixed with people that were A'ajami, people that were non-Arabs. So their speech and their understanding of the Arabic language was pure, quote unquote, was untainted, was like walking and drinking and breathing. It was just part of their culture and part of their life. And it was so pure in a sense from outward, external influences from other languages, that it was just sadaqin, it was just part of them, part of their nature. Okay, so Fusha, what I'm trying to say by this slide is that Fusha, classical Arabic, was something that was just part of the very nature of being an Arab, a Bedouin or part of a tribe and living in the desert. The Arabic language and poetry was just part of their living. And it's not like they actually studied it or they actually codified the Arabic language and they actually came up with these terms. These terms that we're talking about, mubtada, khabar, that you study when you're studying Arabic, they came later on. And that's what we're going to see. So when did the science of grammar and the Arabic language become an applied or a science that is, taught and studied from a theoretical standpoint, and it was not just part of the very nature of the people who speak it? This happened when the exposure of Arab tribes to so pretty much the exposure of Arab tribes to linguistically diverse populations with Muslim conquest led to concerns about the preservation of the language of the Quran. So pretty much the study of grammar and the study of the Arabic language from a theoretical standpoint and the codification of the Arabic language and the standardization of the Arabic language happened with Muslim conquests. When Arabs with Islam, they started spreading it in the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire, and they started meeting people that spoke different languages. What started happening is that there was language contact and there was language borrowing, right? So certain Persian words starting entering the Arabic language in a greater number. Same thing with Roman words or Latin words and Greek words, if you will, right? And non-Arabs started entering to Islam and started trying to speak Arabic, and it started, quote unquote, tainting this classical Arabic that was just part of the very nature of the Arab. So this is when we start seeing the study of Arabic grammar and Arabic language in general, and the standardization of its writing began during the time of the Tabi'un. So the study of Arabic grammar and the standardization of its writing began during the time of the Tabi'un. Tabi'un is the generation that comes right after the disciples of the Prophet Muhammad. So those that came right after that generation, so a second generation of Muslims, if you will, those are what we refer to as a Tabi'un. So the second generation of Muslims, with people like Abu Aswad al-Du'ali in the city of Basra, this is when we start seeing the study of the Arabic language in terms of its theory and it being codified and the writing system being standardized and things being added to it. Okay, so scholars like Abu Aswad al-Du'ali and other scholars that we're going to talk about, they started with the commandments or with the command of certain Islamic leaders. They started writing down and codifying the Arabic language. Without going into too much details in terms of the actual anecdotes. So the Arabic language continued being codified and standardized with great scholars like Abu Aswad al-Duli, which just talked about. We also have Abdullah ibn Abi Ishaq. We also have Isa ibn Umar al-Thaqafi. We also have Khalid ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi. So this is a very important figure, Khalid ibn Ahmed al-Farahidi, because he's actually the one who wrote the first Arabic dictionary, for example. So he wrote Kitab al-Ain, which is the first Arabic dictionary. It's actually likewise the first dictionary in the world. And he also came a lot or standardized a lot of the writing system of the Arabic language. Likewise, he also contributed a lot to the science of tajweed, which is pretty much the phonetic system of the Arabic language. He also contributed and actually, discovered the science of urud, which is the science of Arabic prose and the different measures that poetry in Arabic follows. So he did a lot and he added a lot to understanding the Arabic language and codifying it and standardizing the Arabic language. Likewise, we have the famous Sibawayh, whose real name is Umar ibn Uthman, who was the student of Khalid ibn Ahmad, and he's the one who wrote Al-Kitab, which is the first real grammar book that really breaks down the rules of grammar and really, explains how Arabic grammar functions in details. So these scholars started coming about and they started codifying the Arabic language. So take an example of the Arabic script. This is the script of the Quran, okay? So at the beginning, the script of the Quran would look something like this. So Arabic writing was something like this. So as you can see here, it's a lot less detailed than what we nowadays read, which is something along these lines here, when there are the tashkilat, right? The tashkil, the fatha, the dhamma, the kasra, that signifies and shows what the sound's going to be, what the vowel mark's going to be, whether they're going to say r, e, or u. Likewise, you also have a tanqil. So this is when the actual dots were added. So for example, the dot under the jim was added, the dot on the fa was added, the 3 dots on the sheen was added, because at the beginning it wasn't there. So why were these extra, reading marks added? Because they needed to make it easier for non-Arabs to read the Quran. So that's what I'm talking about when I say the standardization, the codification in the Arabic language. So this was all of what I just talked about was in light and trying to preserve the language of the Quran, preserve this classical Arabic that the Arabs just used to speak and that the Prophet ﷺ was the most eloquent in, and the Sahabas. This entire process was in trying to preserve that classical Fusha Arabic, that's the language of the Quran, is the language of the Prophet ﷺ and of the early Muslims. So this was all in trying to do this, and they were very much successful in doing this, as you can see with the preservation of the Quran al-Karim. Now, at the same time, what was happening in the Muslim world was language contact. So at the same time, language contact was happening throughout the Muslim Arab world. Language contact is when 2 or more different languages come together and they start borrowing words, right? They start borrowing expressions. They start maybe even developing jargons. And then obviously you have pidgins. And then obviously after that, we have Creoles. So this is just an example of the Abbasid Caliphate that was in the 9th century. So Muslims, or Arabs, I should say, were just in the Arabian Peninsula, right? Around here. And now they're going to Egypt. They're going as far as Spain, right? They're going deep into Asia or Eastern Asia, right? Right? They're going deep into Anatolia and they're meeting, people like Greeks and so on and so forth. So there's a lot of different Arabs that are moving out of the Arabian Peninsula and they're bringing their language and their culture to other people. But obviously what's going to happen is that there's going to be a mixture of language. There's going to be language barrier. Obviously, this language that the Arabs are speaking in Spain is not going to be the same as the one speaking in Mecca. Why? Because in Spain, they're coming into contact with the Amazigh, right? Which are the native North African people. They're coming into contact with Portuguese, with Spanish, maybe a bit of French. So obviously that's going to change the way they're going to speak. Just like if we go to, for example, New York, they're going to speak a bit different than down in Miami, right? And they're going to speak very different in Miami than here in Ottawa, in Canada. And likewise in Britain, it's a lot different. Why is that the case? Because there's a language contact that's going on. So what happened when all this language contact was happening? Well, we have dialects that start forming. And that's why we have multiple different types of Arabic dialects, right? So we have the Gulf dialects, which are the Khaliji dialects, which can also be broken down to different categories, right? We have the Moroccan dialect, right? We also have the Libyan Arabic, we have Egyptian Arabic, we have Mauritanian Arabic, Hassaniya. We have all these different dialects that are forming. Why? Because of this, okay? So this is how dialects started coming about, or dialects that were very different than, the Fusha classical Arabic. So at the same time, we have the codification and the standardization of Fusha, right? Its writing system and so on and so forth, making it clear, putting down clear grammar rules to make it very clear for non-Arabs to learn. But at the same time, we're having all these dialects that are forming. Okay, so this is Fusha. So where does MSA come into this, right? Where does modern standard Arabic come into this? So the development of MSA. So Arabic linguists like Abdul Kafi al-Ibirini, who wrote a famous or a very good book called Modern Arabic Social Linguistics. So in his book, Abdul Kafi, he mentions mainly three factors that led to what we present day call modern standard Arabic. Okay, so this term MSA and this idea of modern standard Arabic was pretty much the result of these three different things, these three different factors that came about. The first one is the westernization and secularization processes that were induced into many urban centers in the Arab region, such as Beirut, Cairo, and Baghdad. So with the coming of Napoleon during the 18th century in Egypt, obviously that started the process of, westernization. A lot of Western ideas started coming in. Obviously, we have colonization that starts happening, right? So we have the French that start colonizing the North of Africa, right? We have the British that start colonizing Egypt. So we're having these Western powers that are coming in and they're bringing their ideas and they're spreading them, okay? So we have a general westernization, if you even want to call it modernization process going on, quote unquote. Likewise, there was also mass media and literacy and intellectual movements that were being driven by Western educated intellectuals. So we have a lot of now people, Arabs, right, or people that their native tongue was Arab, native Muslims, that are going to France, right? They're going to Britain, and they're learning, right? And they're learning these Western ideas. They're learning what democracy is, liberalism, right? They're learning the different notions of psychology from a Western standpoint. So they're learning all these new ideas, okay? And we're going to see what they did with that. Likewise, you have Arabic academies. So particularly those in Damascus, Cairo, and Baghdad, which were dedicated to establishing a single standard variety. And we're going to also talk about that. So these three factors coming together pretty much created this term of modern standard Arabic. So the first factor was what we just talked about, which is pretty straightforward. The second factor is that, and this is where it's probably the greatest factor in quote unquote, which is that, as Abdul Kafi mentions, mass media and literacy and intellectual movements that were captained by the same group of Western educated intellectuals who initiated the modernization process. These intellectuals used different media outlets to discuss a wide range of topics that were a staple of European social and intellectual life, but were then new to the Arab milieu. This necessitated the induction of many new concepts and terms into Arabic, both in its written and oral form. So this is the last sentence here is what's important for us, which is that these Western educated intellectuals, when they came back with these new ideas were very foreign, and we didn't have, or the Arabs didn't have, an equivalent to it in their own language. So they started adding new words, coming up with new words like demokratiya and these other terms that started entering into the Arabic word, into the Arabic language, because there was no equivalent at that time, right? So a lot of, engineering terms, a lot of philosophy terms, and the likes, and a lot of political terms started being added to the Arabic language. Now, at the same time, this is also a major factor, is that Arabic academies, particularly those in Damascus, Cairo, and Baghdad, which were dedicated to establishing a single standard variety that could be accessible to all Arabic-speaking people and simultaneously distinct from the regional colloquial varieties. So obviously we have Fusha, we have Classical Arabic. Classical Arabic is used in the religious circles, right? It's used as a liturgy language for the Quran and so on and so forth. But in the daily life, people were speaking these dialects that we just covered. And now these academies, they wanted to bring, obviously there was nationalism, Arabic nationalism that was starting to form at that time. So they wanted one standard variety that will be at the same time sort of distant from the classical, Fusha, or that idea of liturgical language, and at the same time wasn't all these distinct colloquial varieties. And at the same time, they needed to add all these new terms and then standardize these new terms. How are you going to write the term demokratiya? How are you going to write certain engineering terms, right? How are you actually going to pronounce them? So as Abdul Aziz notes, the efforts of these academies to modernize Arabic was more successful at the lexical and stylistic levels, less so at the grammatical level. So the grammar stayed the same. The grammar always stayed the same. So the grammar between what we call quote unquote MSA and what we call classical Arabic is exactly the same. But what was new about modern standard Arabic was that these new terms were being added, right? And they were being standardized. So that being said, is there really a difference between modern standard Arabic and classical Arabic if the only difference between them is just that, quote unquote, what we call MSA has more, Western terms, when classical Arabic is pretty much the same thing, just that in a sense you can say it doesn't have those terms, but you could just see that that is just a natural evolution of the language. So that's why several, as Abdul Kafi Al-Biri mentions, several Arabic social linguists have questioned the division between classical Arabic, what people call Fusha, if you will, and modern standard Arabic. For example, Zu'ul remarks, the concept of MSA is unheard of in the Arabic region, and it's assumed in fact to be FA, Al-Fusha. Other than the specialists who have received their training in the West, particularly America, few people recognize its existence. And I highly recommend people to go read the actual book. It's Modern Arabic, a Social Linguistic Perspective, if I'm not mistaken. That's the name of the book. So what's being said here is that in the Arab world, right, there's only one Fusha. And Fusha is the term that's used to both refer to the Quran that you're going to find in the Arabic language, or the Arabic language you're going to find in the Quran, and it's also, Fusha is also a term that's used to refer to the Arabic language that you're going to hear, in the news, and that you're going to hear in academic fields and so on and so forth. So that's why in reality, the conclusion can be this, that we have colloquial Arabic, which are all these dialects that came about, right? And then we have what we call Fusha. And under Fusha, some people decide to break it down into two categories, specifically as we just saw, Western, Orientalists, if you will. They break it down to classical Arabic, which is the Arabic that's used for religious reasons, the Arabic that's found in the Quran, and MSA, which is the Arabic language that's used in the news and that's used in, academic fields and so on and so forth. But in reality, these two things are exactly the same. Just that if you, whatever you want to call MSA, just has these modern terms, quote unquote, but classical Arabic and MSA have the same exact grammar. So you can just see what people call MSA as the natural, if you will, evolution in a sense of classical Arabic. And that's why in the Arab world, there's just Fusha. There's nothing called MSA pretty much, as we saw. So that is pretty much the difference between Fusha and MSA. In reality, there's not really a difference. It's both just Fusha, which is the classical Arabic, which is distant and different from the colloquial Arabic that came about through language contact and the spread of Islam and the spread of Arab culture.